All right, so you're trying to learn tricks like frontside and backside 180 ollies, sex changes, carving at the top of the wave, stall switches, and lots of other stuff, but they're not working because something's just missing. Well, the secret that all these tricks have in common is a body movement called a hip switch, and that's what we're going to show you today. Once you apply this movement to those tricks, it's going to make them all a whole lot easier to do. Today we're going to run through all these tricks and show you how to apply hip switches to each one. So if you want to improve your flow riding, then stick around. So over the last few weeks, I've been riding with some people who are having problems learning some tricks. Some of the riders were beginners and others were intermediates. But what I realized was that as I was trying to explain to them how to do these tricks, I was explaining the same motion to all of them, but we were just applying that motion to different level tricks. So what I want to talk about today is a movement that's used across flow riding from beginners to pro level, and that's called a hip switch. What a hip switch allows you to do is to easily turn your body from this position to 180 degrees facing in the opposite direction. What we're first going to do is explain what hip switches are, and then we're going to show you where to apply them in a whole bunch of different tricks. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on each trick, but learning how to apply a hip switch to each one is the key to learning them. To describe this movement, I'm going to teach it by doing a sex change, or in the skateboard world, they call it a body varial. And that's basically where you jump off your board and your body does a 180 in the air and then lands back on your board, but your board never moves. So the other day I was riding with a guy who was attempting these, and basically what he was doing was he was doing one big jump and turning his body up in the air, all in one big stiff motion. And he would just wipe out every time. You know these type of stiff riders, they're like frozen on their boards. We see them all the time, right? So to help him out, what we did was we added in a hip switch into the motion to make it easier. And within a few tries, he was starting to get them. So here's the basic motion. We can move our shoulders compared to our hips 90 degrees in each direction. So what we're going to do when we do a sex change is we're first going to turn our shoulders so that they face the front of the Flowrider. That will allow us to bring our hips around 180 degrees to complete the trick. Now, even though my shoulders never moved, this is still a sex change, even though it's a very choppy movement. Once we learn this choppy movement, then we're going to improve it into one big flowing motion. Because only your lower body is doing that big 180 movement, while your head and upper body are moving much less, then the whole trick becomes easier because it's much more stable. When we first learn the trick, we're going to do it in 3 steps. Step 1 is squaring up your shoulders. Step 2 is bringing your hips through. And then step 3 is bringing your shoulders square back to the current. Then as we get comfortable with this 3-step movement, what we're going to do is we're going to combine them into one flowing motion. The way that we would do that is we're going to lead with our shoulders, and as our shoulders get to about a 45-degree angle, then we're going to jump and follow with our hips. Our hips are basically going to catch up to our shoulders about halfway through the move as we're actually facing forward. Then as we start coming down, our hips are going to take the lead. They're going to go through past our shoulders, and then when we land on the board, our shoulders are kind of facing about 45 degrees in this direction, and then our shoulders continue until they're facing in the opposite direction. Now, the better you become at each trick, the smoother they're going to look. But honestly, with most of these tricks, I still go into them just leading with my shoulders turned. Now, I just want to point out something else that's very important, which is swinging your arms. Swinging your arms is just so important in moving around on a flow rider. Your arms are going to start out here. And as you start to turn your hips this way, your arms are going to have to swing in the opposite direction, just like we do in carving. Our arms are going to have to be that counter movement so that you can bring your hips around. Once again, arms are going to go this way, hips go this way, just like this. And then you're going to wind up in this position here. So that's basically a hip switch, which is just another part of the flow riding puzzle. Now let's show you where you can use this to learn lots of new tricks. Since we're already talking about sex changes, not only can you use it going from regular to switch, but you can also use it going back from switch to regular. These are both forward-facing sex changes. You can also do them as rear-facing sex changes, where you turn your shoulders square to face the top of the wave and then do the sex change. Once again, you could do the rear-facing sex changes regular to switch and then back from switch to regular. Since I can't do these switch to regular, I'll just reverse the video image to show you. Sometimes when I'm playing around, I'll do 2 of them in a row, so my body does a full 360 while my board never moves. If you're more of a beginner, then you can do the sex changes on the nozzle, which makes them much easier. Just ride up onto the nozzle and do a hip switch while jumping both feet at once. Remember, when you're learning all of these tricks, square your shoulders up first, then bring your hips through. Next we have 180 ollies. You see a lot of people attempt to do 180 ollies with their bodies really stiff. And what happens is they start out forward on the wave like this, and then they cut severely across the wave so that their board is already turned this much. And then when they do an ollie, they turn it a slight bit more, and they call that a 180 ollie. We see this all the time at the flowboard contests, and the judges usually just look at each other and they wonder should they count it or not. So we need to clean that up by getting some better rotation using hip switches. So once again, we're going to first turn our shoulders 90 degrees, do the ollie, and bring our hips around 180 degrees. Once we get comfortable with this, then it's going to turn into a continuous flowing motion where we lead with our shoulders, follow with our hips, and then bring everything around in one motion. Same thing applies to front side 180 ollies. We're first going to turn our shoulders square to the front of the Flowrider, then ollie our board and bring our hips around. 2 little tips here. When we're first learning 180 ollies, our board is going to land sideways to the current a lot of the time. As you improve, you'll get your board further and further around to eventually land more parallel with the current. Second, and this is very important to learning 180 ollies. Up to now, you've been doing your ollies by taking off straight towards the current, and this is where all your muscle memory is at this point. Now we're going to have to change that up, and what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to learn how to launch an ollie with our shoulders turned in this position where we're facing the back of the Flowrider. And that's going to apply to front side ollies also, where you're launching your ollie with your shoulders facing the front of the Flowrider. So practice launching your ollies with your shoulders turned both front side and also back side. Once you have them down, it'll be a lot easier to do everything in one motion where you just lead with your shoulders and then you launch your ollie. All right, now let's apply hip switches to a situation for absolute beginners that you can use on your very first run. When you're first learning, a lot of times what happens is your body opens up and then your board starts to swing around so that you're facing backwards. You wind up in this position here. Now, I just want to say this, and it's only my opinion for whatever that's worth, which is not much. This is backwards riding. It's not really switch. Your feet are all out of position here. It's kind of like if you were riding regular and then you moved up on your board all the way to the front of the board and tried riding from here. It's just a bad, unstable position. Try to get out of this as quickly as possible. Now, if you are backwards like this and you move your feet to the back of the board, about here, this is switch riding. Or if you're riding in a symmetrical snowboard stance, where your feet are here, and then you swing your board around, then this is switch riding. In any case, if you're backwards here and you can't get back to going forwards, then what do? Hip switch. First, you're gonna turn your shoulders so that they're facing the front of the Flowrider, and then you're gonna pull your hips around 180 degrees so that your board winds up facing forward. It's that easy. Next on the beginner's list is stalls. Stalls are very important to learn to help you get your side edge control. Once you learn a carve, you want to practice both toe side stalls and heel side stalls. Now, to go directly from a toe side stall to a heel side stall at the top of the wave, you want to do a hip switch. So what we're going to do is we're going to be facing the top of the Flowrider, doing a toe stall. And then we're going to turn our shoulders 90 degrees to the side of the Flowrider. And then we're going to crank our hips 180 degrees around so that we're now in a heel stall facing the front of the Flowrider. You can also do them in the opposite direction, where you're going to turn your shoulders 90 degrees, and now you're going to crank the hips back around 180 degrees, and now we're going to wind up back in a toe stall facing the top of the Flowrider. Now, here's another little tip for stalls. The way to get into a stall is by doing half of a hip switch. So from a normal riding position, what you're gonna do is you're gonna turn your shoulders 90 degrees so that they're facing the bottom of the Flowrider. And then instead of rotating our hips 180 degrees all the way through, we're just gonna rotate your hips and your board 90 degrees to line up with our shoulders. And now we're in the stall position. You could do this for both toe stalls and heel stalls. Obviously with toe stalls, you're gonna be turning your shoulders 90 degrees in the opposite direction, where we're facing the top of the Flowrider, and then we're gonna bring our hips around 90 degrees to meet our shoulders. Now, similar to the stalls is carving at the very top of the wave. The general rule is that the higher up the wave that you carve, the more you need to get your board sideways so that you could dig more of these side edges into the water to keep you from sliding down the wave. When you're carving at the very top of the wave, you're getting very close to keeping the board perpendicular to the current. So it's really getting your shoulders continuously facing the side of the wave and then rotating your hips 180 degrees underneath you to keep your side edges dug into the current, which will allow you to stay up high on the Flowrider. Think of this carving motion as just a series of hip switches, and that'll keep you up at the top of the wave. And then finally, I want to show you a little application of the hip switch for carving. This is TK Barreto, who's my favorite rider to watch. Not only does he do big, unique tricks, but he also does crazy high ollies where he tweaks everything out. Here he does a nose stall, which is just a great little carving move where he applies the hip switch to it. What he does is carve across the wave so his hips and shoulders are perpendicular to the current. Then he does a little half hip switch and rotates his hips 90 degrees to bring the nose of the board up over the rail. Then he does a full hip switch and rotates his hips 180 degrees to take him back down to the bottom of the wave. Notice how he uses his arms in a counter motion to help swing his hips around. Okay, so that's the basics for hip switches. You're going to be using this movement all the time in flow riding. As you move past the tricks on this video, you'll start to do more combo tricks that use these. So look out for this movement in the tricks you're attempting and use it as needed. Bottom line, we need to start getting loosened up with our hips and our shoulders. And as we get this body twisting movement to be second nature, our riding will start to improve dramatically. That's it for today. See you on the next video.